The Inheritance Games by Jennifer Lynn Barnes. Avery Grimes has a plan for a better future. Survive high school, win a scholarship, and get out. But her luck changes in an instant when billionaire Tobias Hawthorne dies and leaves her virtually his entire fortune. The only catch? Avery must move into his sprawling mansion full of secret passages, riddles, and codes. Unfortunately for Avery, Hawthorne House is also occupied by the family that was just disinherited. This includes the 4 Hawthorne grandsons, dangerous, magnetic boys who grew up with every expectation that one day they would inherit billions. Heir apparent Grayson is convinced that Avery is a con woman, and he's determined to take her down. But his brother Jameson views her as his grandfather's last hurrah. In order to inherit the fortune left by Tobias Hawthorne, Avery must solve a twisted riddle, one last puzzle to solve. To do this, she must explore the strange mansion with secret halls and passageways, doors to nowhere. She must play games and solve puzzle after puzzle, putting each piece together. Caught in a world of wealth and privilege, with danger around every turn, Avery will have to play the game herself, just to survive. The Inheritance Game by Jennifer Lynn Barnes.
You gotta help me, Mildred? Miss Nizio can bring in a cat. I can bring in a cat too. You wanna stay? We can edit this out afterwards. But I actually don't know how I can hold a book and make this happen. So I think you're gonna have to go, Mildred.
Hey, Mr. Arksey from the library. I'm gonna preface with the fact that I'm pretty sure my book won't win and that nobody's heard of it. But the whole point of this thing was to try to introduce some people to some really important ideas, and so I hope that this gets that out there. And even if you don't vote for it, I do think it's an amazing book that you should read. Now I'm going to get on with my spiel. About 6 years ago, I took a trip to Boston, and as I usually do whenever I travel, I spent countless hours browsing used bookstores. I especially looked forward to exploring the shops around Harvard University, figuring their selection would be incredible. By the time I headed home, I'd gathered so many titles that I had to pay for overweight luggage. Do you guess whether or not I was right? Of all the books I brought back, M.T. Anderson's Symphony for the City of the Dead remains the most memorable. It chronicles Dmitri Shostakovich's life before and after the siege of Leningrad. The siege began when Nazi Germany broke its pact with the Soviets in a ruthless pursuit of Lebensraum for the master Aryan race, the only group Hitler's Nazi party thought deserved a good life. Other groups would become workers to power Germany, or at worst would be exterminated. Over 1.5 million people died in the city's 29-month blockade, yet even amid starvation and relentless bombardment, Shostakovich was determined to compose, and in effect rehearse and direct, his 7th symphony for Leningrad's residents over the radio. Orchestra members risked, and sometimes lost, their lives traveling to practice, with some even succumbing to starvation before the final performance. Yet that triumphant concert became a symbol of the besieged city's unbreakable spirit. Anderson also reveals the challenges Shostakovich faced after the war under Stalin's oppressive regime, reminding us that authoritarianism can take many forms, whether through Nazi expansionism or Soviet censorship. Ultimately, Symphony for the City of the Dead warns of the dangers in labeling entire groups as others, and shows how creativity can serve as a beacon of resilience in the face of tyranny. It's a moving testament to the power of art and a call to remain vigilant against forces that threaten our shared humanity. Anderson succeeds here at writing a history book about a complex topic in a way that is impeccably clear, engaging, and readable. This is not your standard history book, and when you've finished reading it, you will forever shape how you hear that symphony. It becomes a story, a vitally important one for humanity's past, present, and future.
Alright, so here's the book, Symphony for the City of the Dead. It does contain some tough stuff, just a content warning. It's set in the war. He was even more anxious in the theater right before the concert. He seemed to suffer agonies, recalled Ilya Slonim. The audience insisted on seeing him before it began, and he stood up on the platform, rigid and unsmiling. He spoke both to the audience in front of him and the radio audience listening to the broadcast. What he said was presumably similar to the statement he released later. "My music is my weapon," he declared. "We are struggling for the highest human ideals in history. We are battling for our culture, for science, for art, for everything we have created and built. I dedicate my 7th Symphony to our struggle with fascism, to our coming victory over the enemy, and to my native city, Leningrad." Then Samuel Samosud raised his baton, and for the first time the world heard Shostakovich's symphony. The opening strides forth confidently. If it is a portrait of a city, it is a city animated with purpose and pride. Then a second melody follows, this one gentler and tender, quiet. But it is at this point that the symphony itself is invaded. Very softly, with the rattle of drums, Shostakovich's irritating little march starts. Plucky, even twee. It does not seem menacing yet, but it is repeated again and again. It is as infuriatingly memorable as a propaganda slogan drilled into the ears over months. It grows in volume until its empty repetitions have forced everything else out of memory. The symphony's previous themes are gone. There is only this one untiring, repeated statement. Once again, people in the audience thought of this theme as the approach of the Germans, of war and Hitlerism. 1, 2, left, right, machines as intelligent as men and men as soulless as machines approached our frontiers, wrote journalist Evgeny Petrov. People thought of the news bulletins announcing city after city falling prey to armored tank divisions. The stupid melody grew, it blared. It shakes the hall, Petrov wrote. Some iron machine runs over human bones and you hear them crack. You clench your fists. You want to shoot at this monster with a zinc snout that is marching down upon you. No longer does the march sound cute. Its full brutality has been revealed, and then it comes to a climax in a gesture Shostakovich used often, a brief intake of breath, followed by huge, held, ghastly chords, tremulous with hatred, a vision of evil unveiled. Little Maxim Shostakovich, attending his first concert, could not stop thinking about the menace in that theme later in the evening, once he had been taken home. I kept on hearing this music even when I was asleep at night, the drums starting from afar, then getting louder and louder. He awoke in a panic, jumped out of the bed, and ran to the old woman who took care of him in Galina. She soothed him by making the sign of the cross over his head and whispering an illegal prayer. The rise of this march in the first movement, the so-called invasion theme, is what most people remembered about the symphony as it was heard all over the world in the year to follow. The first movement ends with a quiet return of the original peacetime melodies. Shostakovich once described their transformation and repetition as a requiem, though perhaps they sound more exhausted than sorrowful. Just when they seem to have come to rest, we hear a distant echo of the ugly march, with a trumpet playing an echo of the hideous, perky tune off stage. War is not over. It is simply distant for the moment. The orchestra was deeply committed to the piece as they played. Samosud wrote, "Never in my 33 years as a conductor have I ever seen professional musicians perform a work in a state of agitation verging on tears." Shostakovich's 7th Symphony is more than 70 minutes long. After the oddly lilting second movement, the stark, lonely fanfares of the third, the watchfulness and brave struggle of the fourth, the piece ends in a final triumph. Suddenly, in the midst of euphoria, the confident melody that started the whole symphony strides forward again, now potent and in control. With that, the massive piece comes to a spectacular close.